Next chapter, evolution. Now, in our topics on classification, we talked about the phylogenetic relationships between organisms, which basically means that all living organisms have a common ancestry. And the reason they are different today is because of the process of evolution that has taken place over the course of time. So, what is evolution? In biology, evolution can be defined as any change in the heritable traits, for example physical traits like color in mice, or spots on the wings of butterflies within a population across generations. So let's see how that works. Remember, all living organisms are capable of reproduction in which they make copies of themselves. For this to happen, they duplicate their DNA and pass it to their future generations. For instance, a single-cell amoeba reproduce by copying their DNA, moving both copies to either side of their body, splitting right down in the middle, and growing back into their full size. If all goes well, the two amoeba will look exactly similar. But nature is not always perfect. We saw that when DNA is being copied, errors can occur, which modifies the DNA code. This is what we called a DNA mutation. This mutation, which is completely accidental, can produce variations in the body shape and function of the creature who receives the modified DNA. In this case, one daughter cell has a longer arm. If it survives long enough to grow and reproduce, that longer arm, which is now coded in the DNA, will be passed on to its children. And evolution has effectively occurred. Evolution in higher animals is a bit more complicated because reproduction is sexual. But it still happens. Evolution is a gradual change from simple to complex life forms. It is therefore a focal point on scientific investigations into the nature and origin of life. It helps us understand how life, once it came into existence, diversified into the many forms we see today. It also helps us make sense of the way modern creatures continue to change and adapt today. To understand the changes and life forms on Earth over millions of years, we first need to know how life itself originated. The origin of life forms, or biodiversity, is interlinked with the evolution of the Earth, which is again interlinked with the evolution of the universe. Now, the universe is diverse, comprises many galaxies, and is almost 20 billion years old. The Big Bang Theory attempts to explain the origin of the universe. According to this theory, a single, huge explosion caused the small, dense universe to expand, which resulted in lowering of temperatures. It further states that the universe continues to expand even today. After the passage of time, gases such as hydrogen and helium got formed. They condensed due to gravitation and gave rise to the different galaxies in the universe. One of the galaxies known to us is the Milky Way, which contains the solar system, and the Earth is one of the planets on the system. At the time of its formation, there was no atmosphere on Earth. Its surface was covered by water vapor, methane, carbon dioxide, and ammonia released from the molten mass. It is estimated that life appeared on Earth 500 million years after its formation. There are several theories which try to explain the origin of life on Earth. In this video, we shall look at the spontaneous generation, chemical evolution, and special creation theories. According to the spontaneous generation theory, life originated from inanimate things. This theory assumes that life came from non-living, decaying and rotting matter such as stones and mud. Even the famous philosopher Aristotle believed in this theory. Some scientists like John Needham supported this theory by conducting some experiments. In one of his experiments, he boiled some chicken broth in a flask and then cooled it to room temperature in an open container. Later, he sealed this container. After a few days, he observed a few microbes in it. Needham believed that some forces had brought life out of the non-living matter, but today we know that the content must have been contaminated by microbes from the air. The theory of spontaneous generation was challenged by a German biologist, Rudolf Virchow, with his theory of biogenesis, which basically states that life comes from life, and so living cells could only arise from pre-existing living cells. He, however, could not prove this theory of biogenesis. Later, Louis Pasteur, with his experiments, proved the theory of biogenesis and forever silenced the spontaneous generation arguments. In his experiment, he used a pre-sterilized sealed flask with killed yeast. This flask did not show any sign of life. On the contrary, in another flask, he exposed the killed yeast to the air. And not surprisingly, living organisms were found in this flask. Another theory, called the chemical evolution, was expounded by a Russian scientist, Alexander Ivanovich, and a British scientist, John Sanderson. They proposed that the first forms of life originated from pre-existing, non-living organic molecules such as RNA and proteins. They also postulated that the birth of life was preceded by chemical changes, leading to formation of diverse organic molecules from inorganic constituents. When the Earth was formed, the conditions were high temperature, volcanic storms, and reducing atmosphere consisting of methane and ammonia. In 1953, an American scientist, Stanley Miller, recreated these conditions in a laboratory. He created an electric discharge in a closed flask containing methane, ammonia, hydrogen, and water vapor at 800 degrees Celsius. After a few days, he observed the formation of amino acids. Later on, while conducting similar experiments, other scientists observed the formation of sugars, pigments, nitrogen bases, and fats. Interestingly, when meteorite contents was analyzed, similar compounds were found in them. And so, according to this theory, life could have begun through a catalytic effect of lightning or some other catalyst, bringing together elements to form complex molecules such as amino acids and sugars from simple molecules such as water, ammonia, and methane. This theory of chemical evolution is now widely acceptable, but there are still doubts about how the first living cells came into existence. Cellular forms of life originated nearly 2 billion years ago as unicellular organisms in water, and so it's probable that all forms of life originated from a water environment. Now, for many years, we have known of the fascinating story of creation of the universe and species. Most religions believe in the divine creation of the world by arguing that an omnipotent God created the earth and the varied species. According to this theory, life came into existence through intelligent design by a supreme being. All forms of life were perfectly created and have remained unchanged throughout time. This knowledge is based on faith and can therefore not be disputed nor contradicted by science because it's not scientifically testable. The theory of chemical evolution, which states that the first forms of life arose from non-living chemical molecules through evolutionary forces, is the now widely acceptable scientific explanation of the origin of life. In the 19th century, a British naturalist, Charles Darwin, suggested that complex organisms had evolved from simple ancestors. In 1931, Darwin went on a 5-year exploration on a ship called HMS Beagle. During this time, he conducted various natural historic collections and studied the geology of many places. He published the theory of evolution in 1859 in his book on the origin of species. Charles Darwin stated that existing organisms bear similarities to varying degrees among themselves as well as with forms of life that existed millions of years ago. Several life forms have become extinct now, but new forms of life have also come into existence during different periods of time. Therefore, life forms are constantly undergoing evolution. Evidence in support of the evolution theory. Now, the theory of evolution suggests that there is a change in the inherited traits of a population of organisms through generations. One evidence in support of this theory is found in the study of fossils of prehistoric organisms. Fossils are the preserved remains of animals, plants, and other organisms found in the sedimentary layers of rocks. On observing a cross-section of the Earth's crust, we find that these layers are arranged on top of each other and signify different periods of the Earth's history. Therefore, fossils found in a particular rock sediment belong to the same geological period as that particular sediment layer. For example, the fossil remains of dinosaurs belong to the Mesozoic era. Thus, while some fossils belong to animals that have become extinct now, some also seem to be similar to modern organisms. Fossils suggest that some life forms varied during various periods of the Earth's history, while some flourished only during a particular geological period. They therefore provide evidence that new life forms have emerged during different periods. One of the most widely used and acceptable techniques to determine the relative or actual age of the Earth's crust, fossils, and ancient artifacts is the radioactive dating. Here, a comparison is drawn between an abundantly available radioactive isotope and its decay products by using the rate of decay. The next piece of evidence is called comparative anatomy. Comparative anatomy is the study of the similarities and differences in the anatomy of organisms. There are two concepts of comparative anatomy: homologous and analogous structures. If we consider mammals such as human beings, cats, whales, and bats, we find that all have similar patterns of bones in their forelimbs. For instance, bones such as humerus, ulna, radius, carpals, metacarpals, and phalanges are common in the forelimbs of the mammals. Moreover, each of the limb has 5 digits called the pentadactyl structure. Notice that the anatomical structure of the forelimbs is similar, even though the functions are different in all the 4 mammals. When the same structures develop along different directions because of specific needs of each animal, they are known as homologous structures. These structures point to a common ancestry, and this type of evolution is called divergent evolution. In plants, the thorn of Bougainvillea and the tendrils of Cucurbita represent homologous structures and indicate a common ancestry. On the other hand, when anatomically different structures evolve to perform similar functions in different organisms, they are known as analogous structures. For instance, the flippers of penguins and dolphins and the wings of butterflies and birds are analogous structures. These structures have unrelated embryonic origin but perform similar functions. This type of evolution is called convergent evolution. In plants, examples of analogous structures are potato and sweet potato, which are modified roots and modified stems, respectively. Apart from the homologous and analogous structures, vestigial structures are also used in comparative anatomy. Vestigial structures are those that have, in the course of time, ceased to be functional and therefore have become reduced in size or are rudimentary. Examples of such structures include the appendix, which in humans have no digestive function, while in herbivores like rats, it's well developed and functions as cellulose digesting part of the alimentary canal. A vestigial tail is present in humans in the form of a much reduced coccyx. The whale has no externally visible hind limbs, but their original presence is evidenced by the existence of a rudimentary pelvic girdle. It has structures that resemble the hip, thigh, and shin bones. This one even has a ball and socket joint between the hip and the thigh bones. All these examples of vestigial structures seem to point to the fact that they are present and functional originally in their ancestral forms. The next piece of evidence in support of the evolution theory is found in the geographical distribution of organisms. Now, past and present studies have revealed that although certain climatic conditions are similar in the same latitude of different continents, they are inhabited by different plants and animals. In his exploration, Darwin observed that isolated oceanic islands evolved their own characteristic plants and animals. One such observation he made at the Galapagos Islands, which are near the equator in the Pacific Ocean. The Galapagos is an archipelago of volcanic islands with varied wildlife. What amazed Darwin was the extensive variety of finches in this island. The species of finches differed from each other with respect to the shape of their beaks and their overall size. He observed that all these species had evolved on this island and demonstrated the concept of adaptive radiation. These finches had originally come from the South American mainland to the Galapagos Islands. With the passage of time, they multiplied and began to compete for food. As a result, all the food on the islands were utilized to the optimum. In order to take advantage of all the available food sources on the islands, the finches adapted themselves to the different varieties of food. One observable change that pointed to this adaptation was the altered beaks of different species of finches. Their beaks divided them into specialized insectivorous and vegetarian varieties. We also see the occupation of marsupials such as kangaroo, marsupial rat, banded anteater, tiger cat, Tasmanian wolf, and koala on the Australian island. On tracing the evolution of these marsupials, it was found that the drifting of the continents had shaped their history. During the continental drift, when Laurasia and Gondwanaland broke apart to form separate continents, the marsupials were split into two groups. While one group was isolated on the Australian island, the other group remained in South America. The marsupials in the separate continents evolved in a parallel manner. And so this isolation of animals with common ancestry led to formation of new species in other climatically similar but separate regions. Australia is believed to have drifted first about 200 million years ago, before the evolution of the placental mammals and hence the existence of non-placental marsupials. Another piece of evidence is found in comparative embryology. All sexually reproducing organisms start life as a single cell called a zygote. The zygote undergoes multiple cell divisions to develop into an organism. Embryological studies have led to the conclusion that an organism repeats its ancestral history during development. Embryos of different vertebrate groups have been found to have similar morphological features during their early stages of development. These similarities suggest a common ancestry. The final evidence is found in cell biology. The cells of higher organisms show basic similarities in their structure and function. For instance, all these cells contain cell membrane and organelles such as ribosomes, Golgi bodies, mitochondria, and rough endoplasmic reticulum. And now we look at the mechanisms of evolution. Now, we've seen that the theory of evolution suggests that there is a change in the inherited trait of organisms through generations. But just how does this evolution take place? Let's look at the Lamarck's theory. Jean-Baptiste de Lamarck proposed one of the earliest hypotheses regarding the mechanism of evolution. His arguments were based on the use and disuse of structures by organisms. Lamarck argued that when the environment demanded the use of a particular structure in an organism, the organism developed the structure in response to the demand. For instance, he argued that giraffes had short necks before. But as the food got depleted from the lower parts of the trees, there was demand for longer necks to reach the higher parts of the trees. So the giraffes adapted themselves and elongated their necks while trying to reach these heights. Over millions of years, giraffes have made optimum use of their necks and passed on the character of a long neck to their future generations. The argument that organisms adapt to changing environment was valid, but it is the suggestion that acquired characteristics were inherited that makes Lamarck's theory unacceptable. Phenotypic changes in an organism are not inherited. Now we look at Darwin's theory. In his book on the origin of species, Darwin pointed out that natural selection was the mechanism for evolution. According to this concept, any population of organisms that adapt itself more regularly to natural conditions such as climate, food and physical factors has better chances of survival. Darwin's studies showed that the finches in the Galapagos had survived by adapting to different habitats. This was evident from the altered beaks of different species of finches on the island. The process of natural selection allows organisms to inherit traits from the previous generations. These traits help them adapt to the current environment and increases the chances of survival as they reproduce more successfully than others. This evolutionary phenomenon is called adaptive radiation. Natural selection preserves and accumulates advantageous genetic mutations. For example, consider that a colony of bacteria called bee is growing in a certain environment. In case the environment of this bacterial colony is changed, there will be some bacteria, say B1, who will be able to adapt and survive under the new conditions. In a matter of a few hours, this variant population will breed further, pass on their new trait, and establish themselves as a completely new species. The ability to adapt is in their genes and is inherited. In plants and animals, the same evolution will take place over a long period of time because their lifespan is longer. While elaborating on the concept of natural selection, Darwin stressed fitness. Nature favors the survival of the fittest. In other words, in the struggle for existence, individuals with better fitness have a greater potential for survival. The population growth of organisms is limited because they compete with each other for natural resources. For instance, a rise in population of fish in a river will lead to competition for resources among themselves. And therefore, members who adapt themselves and compete fiercely will survive, while the weaker ones will perish. And now we look at natural selection in action. Now, the concept of natural selection is best reflected in the substantial increase in the number of dark moths compared to the white moths after the Industrial Revolution in England. Before the Industrial Revolution, the white moths far outnumbered the dark moths. But after industrialization, the populations of the dark moths grew considerably and outnumbered the white moths. But why would this happen? The reason cited is that before industrialization, the barks of the trees were covered with white lichen, which effectively camouflaged the white moths from predators but exposed the dark ones. After industrialization, the lichen died due to pollution and the barks of the trees became black due to smoke and soot. This created perfect conditions for survival of the dark moth, and the dark surfaces camouflaged them very well from predators. Meanwhile, the white moths could easily be noticed by predators, and as a result, their numbers shrank. However, in the rural areas where industrialization had not taken place, the population of dark moths was low. This study proved that in a mixed population, organisms who adapt themselves to the existing environment have better chances of survival and increases their population sizes. At the same time, no variant is completely wiped out. Evolution is also impacted by human activities. For example, Excessive use of pesticides results in a selection of resistant varieties within a small period of time. Equally, resistant microbes also emerge when we use antibiotics and drugs. For instance, Staphylococcus aureus is a resistant pathogen found on the mucous membranes and the human skin in about a third of the population. It is extremely adaptable to the antibiotic penicillin. So in conclusion, evolution is not a predetermined process but a random one. It is completely based on a chance event, chance mutations, and it is also impacted by human activities. And now we look at human evolution and fossil records. Now, scientists explain the origin of humankind in an evolutionary perspective. The theory of human evolution is constantly being updated and modified based on new discoveries in many fields such as anthropology, paleontology, and molecular biology. Scientists have grouped chimpanzees, gorillas, orangutans, and humans as 4 member species of the Hominidae family. It is believed that around 25 to 9 million years ago, Dryopithecus, a genus of ape, lived in Eastern Africa, Europe, and Asia. It is a representative of the early members of the ape lineage, such as gorillas and chimpanzees. It, however, lacked most of the specialized structures found in present-day humans and apes. For instance, the canines of the Dryopithecus were longer than those of human beings, but were not as developed as those of apes today. The structure of its limbs suggested that it walked like a chimpanzee. Further, its skull did not have a well-developed crest and massive ridges as found in the skulls of modern apes. Another man-like primate that lived around 12 to 14 million years ago was Ramapithecus. Its fossils were found in northern India and East Africa in the beginning of 1932. It was an ape-like creature and a probable human ancestor. Members of the Ramapithecus were probably 4 feet tall. Fossils of man-like bones have been discovered in Ethiopia and Tanzania. The next stage of human evolution is marked by the Australopithecus, who are believed to have lived in East Africa about 2 million years ago. The main feature of the Australopithecus is that they hunted with stones but were primarily fruit eaters. The first human-like beings were the Homo habilis, or the handy man, as their bones were similar to the other Homo species belonging to the Hominidae family. They lived in sub-Saharan Africa between 2 million to 1.5 million years ago and had probably evolved from the Australopithecus. Homo habilis had stronger teeth, which suggests that they might have eaten hard plants and soft animals. The brain capacity was between 650 to 800 cubic centimeters. The next stage was that of Homo erectus, which had probably evolved from Homo habilis. They were human beings of medium stature, who walked upright and lived around 1.5 million years ago. The brain was smaller, around 900 cubic centimeters. while the teeth were longer than those of present-day human beings, as they probably ate meat. Homo erectus flourished until about 200,000 years ago, or even later, and then gave way to another species of the human genus. After Homo erectus, there were several stages that led to the evolution of Homo sapiens. Fossil evidence suggests that around 40,000 years ago, Homo sapiens neanderthalensis, or the Neanderthal man, with a brain size of 1400 cubic centimeters, lived in Europe, North Africa, and Eastern Central Asia. The Neanderthal man is supposed to be the primitive ancestor of the modern man. The members used hides to cover their bodies and buried their dead. They were cave dwellers and good hunters and could use many tools. Neanderthal man were wiped out by another primate, the Cro-Magnon, or the Homo sapiens fossilis, about 25,000 years ago. Fossils suggest that the Cro-Magnon man had evolved between 20,000 and 50,000 years ago during the last glacial period, and their brain capacity was around 1660 cubic centimeters. The members were cave dwellers, good hunters, and carnivorous. They did not have any knowledge on agriculture and domestication of animals. The next species, Homo sapiens sapiens, probably evolved from the Cro-Magnon man between 75,000 and 10,000 years ago during the Ice Age. They began to practice agriculture and settled in colonies. These were the formative beginnings of society, which led to the rise of cities, empires, and civilization, owing to the constant human growth.